Good evening to everyone watching at home, and thank you for joining me tonight for a critical discussion on our state and the coronavirus pandemic. This national crisis has now tragically cost over 16,000 of our fellow Americans' lives. My heart goes out to each of their families. In addition to this public health emergency, millions of us have now been laid off from our jobs in all walks of life. This compounds the fear and anxiety I know feeling right now as the future is suddenly unclear. In a matter of months, the brightest moments in our lives have now been postponed or canceled. Graduations for high school seniors, like my weddings, and the celebration of important religious holidays have each in turn been forced to adapt to our new reality. Now more than ever, people across our community, state, and country are looking for answers. And above all, they are looking for leadership. Tonight, I will lay out our campaign's plan to protect public health, prevent financial disaster, safeguard our democracy. The coronavirus requires the full marshaling of our local, state, and federal governments, not unlike some of the most consequential moments in American history. To fight this global pandemic and the oncoming recession, we cannot afford anything less than bold, persistent action that meets the moment we are now in. I've spent this last several weeks working with my campaign's top policy advisors, whose works to expand affordable housing and create new green energy jobs have been published nationwide. These efforts have produced a comprehensive plan that ensures Ohio can combat the coronavirus, provide immediate and lasting economic relief, and protect the sanctity of our democratic institutions. Our state legislature must be prepared to do all that is necessary to protect Ohioans on all fronts. Just this week, the Speaker of the Ohio House of Representatives created the Ohio 20 Economic Recovery Task Force, chaired by Representative Paul Zeltwanger. This task force will work to chart a recovery path out of our economic crisis. I urge Representative Zeltwanger to use the proposals in this plan to help guide him in his role as chairman. Our district and our state needs to know that he will put the interests of families first and not lose sight of what is at stake. Now is the time for leadership. Ohioans across our state demand nothing less. In the next few minutes, my policy team and I will lay out our response to the coronavirus and how we can continue to implement bold ideas that will create a safer and stronger Ohio and into the future. I would now like to turn to Senior Policy Advisor Devin O'Toole and Policy Advisor Paige Potter. Thank you for joining us this evening. Thank you for joining us this evening.
Hello. Thank you, Morgan. Thanks for having us today.
Thank you both so much for all you've done for the campaign and for what you've been working on over the past couple weeks. I want to start with you, Devin. I want to start with you more about our campaign's proposals and how we're going to be working to implement some bold new ideas for how we can combat the coronavirus. If you want to take us just a little bit through our plan and what some of those key points are going forward.
For sure. And thank you again for giving us the opportunity to present plans. I think like what my biggest takeaway has been working on this policy plan, conducting this research, and seeing the impact that coronavirus has had in our community really is it's made cracks in how our status quo system it's made cracks in our status quo system more apparent. Cracks in how we respond to social justice, cracks in how we respond to economic justice, healthcare access, education, and how we influence our democracy. And so I think really the two big points that I want to hit on today is how our plan works on some of the economic justice portions of our system that have fallen through, and how people in the current CARES Act proposed by the federal government are often left out that are important economic stakeholders. I'd like to start with that discussion of the CARES Act, if that's all right with you.
Definitely. So let's start there. Let's start with the CARES Act and what we can do to improve from there. For those of you who don't, CARES Act was the bill passed by Congress just a little over a week ago, enacting some of the responses that you've now seen to the coronavirus. House Democrats focused in on making sure that we had increased funding for hospitals and healthcare services across the nation, and that we had stimulus funding that went particularly to those who need it most, and that we have oversight on issues related to how we appropriate funds for different companies and corporations who are going to be receiving. Now, those are some of the high points, but we also have concerns that need to be rectified on both the state and federal level. So, Devin, if you want to touch a little bit more on some of those points, I think that'd be great.
For sure, yeah. And like Morgan laid out, I think it's hard to tell just from news blips who has access to the stipends provided by the CARES Act. I think, in some ways intentionally so, that it's that's a little tricky to figure out how it's going to supplement your. And based on the research we've conducted, there's many groups of people that are likely going to be left out of the stipend. Since the amount that you're getting is based on your 2018 and 2019 tax returns, anyone that hasn't filed in either of those years won't have access to it. And some of the people that may receive less than adequate financial support are people who are self-employed, filers without children, parents with disabled children, DACA recipients, single filers and dependents making under about $12,000, mostly low-income families, and joint filers making under $24,000, so low-income couples. And so pretty much what we've seen is the stipend. The stipend isn't enough to really protect our basic needs. It's not enough to make rent for like any more than 2 months at Mackle. It's not enough to deal with the fallout of taking care of a family without having a source of income if you're working one or two part-time jobs or a full-time job before this, and it's not enough to deal with the fallout from trying to keep a small business open. It's just nowhere adequate to keep up with the taxes and administrative funding that you need to sustain a business for people, a financial safety net for yourself, employees. It's there's many cracks in this plan, and I hope we can work forward together within the state of Ohio to build a greater economic safety net for people who are left out.
I couldn't agree more with the last point, in that obviously there were some high points within the bill, but there's so many people that slip through at the end of the day, and that we can do more for, and that we need to do at least something to at least begin. Well, there are so many people who are claimed as dependents on tax returns in particular that are not going to be able to receive some of the benefits outlined within the stimulus bill. So I wanted to turn now and bring Paige, you into the conversation, and let's talk a little bit more about some of the specific proposals within our plan and what we can enact in the State House to provide economic relief, how we can bolster our public health system across the state to prevent more lives, and then what can we do to safeguard our democracy at the end of the day, because this presents so many problems, as we've seen in particular in Wisconsin.
Yeah, I will thank you again for having me, Morgan. I can go deeper into some of the other economic proposals we have. So one of the big points is expanding unemployment and making sure those people who are eligible have access to those benefits in a speedy manner, because obviously those facilities are overrun with claims during these trying times, and making sure people who are available and then expanding those benefits, obviously because of a huge rise in unemployment in the state, is very important. And then we also want a hero's pay for those working on the front line of preventing the spread. So our hospital workers who are really risking their lives, risking their health every day to help keep us healthy and safe. And then another big thing, Devin touched on it a little bit, is housing security. So obviously, without income coming in, a lot of people are worried about rent. But then also landlords are worried about how they're going to keep the payments. So we want to suspend rent through April and May, but then also set up a program to reimburse landlords. So forgiving, for understanding that these are trying times, and that people cannot afford to pay rent, and that they also can't afford to be evicted. Which is, we also want to make it impossible for people to be evicted for those reasons during this trying times. And then another big one is obviously we're moving into very uncertain times with schools. So we want to make sure that if the state schools do end up going online in the fall, that some tuition is refunded, because obviously students were paying for a full college experience. And if we end up having to be online, then we understand that those students, and we want to repay them for state schools for that tuition. Not entirely, but like some reimbursement.
Of course. Yeah, I think those are definitely some absolutely key points for how we can approach one of the things a lot of Americans think on a daily basis, but that now we are all absolutely confronted with on the choices that we make of whether or not you can afford to actually go get the groceries that you need now that you've been laid off, and say you don't know if you're actually going to receive unemployment benefits because our state system is so backed up. We just learned today that for almost the second week in a row, we've almost had 7 million Americans file for unemployment nationwide. And obviously our systems weren't to cope with such large amounts of people filing for unemployment, but that can't be an excuse now to be able to leave so many people up in the air about whether or not they're going to be able to afford next month's rent. So there are all sorts of things that we can do that might seem radical or strange or otherwise, that are out of the ordinary for how we conduct our economy and our state as a whole, but are now incredibly necessary. And so I think that brings us to a particular point about what we can do to protect our democracy overall. And what we can do, people still have the right to vote, and that we don't end up being a state like Wisconsin that forces their voters to go out and to head to the polls, even though this pandemic is at full tilt, and that we have from both people that are elderly and more susceptible to the virus, and people that just simply don't want to risk infecting others or themselves by going to the polls. And so the idea that we've implemented in our plan so far is to be able to make sure that the Ohio Secretary of State has the proper funding needed to have an all mail-in election this November. It's absolutely critical that we make sure that happens as a state, no matter what the federal response is, because that response has been up in the air, I think, at most. So is there any other points that either of you wanted to be able to touch on with that particular plan before we move on to some of the other policy positions?
Morgan, I think you did a great job of outlining how there just needs to be a human focused policy route that Ohio as a state is taking. Like any sort of access to our democracy. Paige, you talked a little bit about eviction and housing security. It's really we're just looking at a time that there's a lot of potential that we can put people first, instead of just like basic finance, attaching a human element to the policy that's proposed. And I think what you're talking about and the platform you're putting forward presents that.
Yeah, there's a number behind every single one of those people that's been infected, that there's a family behind each of those thousands of people that have tragically lost their life because of this. We can't belittle the increase of any of these numbers, whether it's the infection rate or the unemployment, to learn as a country and to implement policies in the State House that reflect, like you said, a humanity first approach. And so on on that exact point, I want to move on to some of the campaign as proposed so far, but then put them into the context and light that the coronavirus reality has forced us into currently. So let's start with our focus on preventing gun violence. We proposed an incredibly ambitious plan to be able to curb gun violence statewide, but there's also some incredibly important points that are very specific we're in. Do you want to break that down, Devin?
Absolutely, yeah. So something that we've been talking a lot about in regards to quarantine, in the boyfriend loophole, in regards to intimate partner violence. Now just kind of like breaking down this policy. This is a policy that's been very well researched by I credit the Gifford Center and Everytown for Gun Safety for the fantastic research on a state-by-state basis on the boyfriend loophole. And kind of a quick summary of what this means is that people, as of now in the state of Ohio, people convicted of domestic abuse misdemeanors are still eligible to purchase firearms if they're not legally married to their partner. And so this loophole allows for really anyone that has the intentions for violence against their partner to face no barriers for accessing firearms. And this is a troubling hole in our gun violence system, because about 4.5 million women alive today in the U.S. have reported that an intimate partner has threatened them using a gun. And being quarantined with a domestic abuser only exacerbates this violence. So it's about time to address this loophole, because there are likely many women that are and men that are stuck inside the house with a domestic abuser. And so just in regards to that, we just want to put forward the Ohio Domestic Violence Network hotline. If the number is 800-934-9840. If you're trapped inside the house during quarantine and feeling unsafe, we really encourage you to reach out and seek help. There are people to help, and it doesn't just need to be policy that changes. There's community organizers that are helping create these safety nets as well.
Yeah. That's absolutely crucial. That we encourage anyone that feels that we have a wherewithal within the state to understand that we've seen gun sales continue to go up, and that we've continued to see that there are problems related to further domestic abuse within this time. So this policy, while it is still incredibly important, the time that we're in, of course, takes on a new light when we're in a pandemic and when we're all forced to shelter in place or stay at home. And so we've got a plan that we've laid out on how we can address gun violence, and there are other issues related to public health as well that can impact how well we're able to combat the coronavirus itself, and how we're able to just keep more people healthy for longer as well. And that stems for how we produce our energy statewide and how we enforce environmental protection law. Paige, you've written an excellent plan of how we can expand our green energy jobs statewide, and how we can become a leader for that. Do you want to talk a little bit more about what we can do there?
Yeah. So I'll first start by talking about how diseases, viruses, particularly like the coronavirus, can be impacted by the environment. So it is a respiratory disease, and so it disproportionately affects people who are more like have respiratory issues like asthma and stuff like that, weaker respiratory systems. And so things like pollution that worsen the air quality can severely weaken people with already weak respiratory systems, which put them at significant risk to viruses like the coronavirus that target the respiratory system. And so if these viruses are going to be something we have to deal with in the future, we also have to deal with managing our air quality to protect people who are most at risk. And I outlined in my plan many ways that we can move forward to expand clean energy sources, but I think the most important part of that plan in this specific particular moment is addressing the issues with House Bill 6 that was passed last year, which bailed out coal plants owned and operated by Ohio First Energy, which obviously is not clean energy, promotes pollution and CO2 emissions, which are not good for the environment in Ohio or for the world, for America, for everyone. We oppose those bailouts. We think that funding should be going to promoting renewable energy sources. And then another really problematic part of that bill was that it really cut back on the renewable energy standards in the state of Ohio, which means that the requirements by the state for companies to, like energy companies, to produce a certain amount of their energy using renewable sources were significantly cut down, and after a certain year in the future that we're closing up on, those requirements will essentially be eliminated. And we obviously oppose that. We think we need to reimpose those standards and increase those standards to promote renewable, clean energy in the state of Ohio.
Yeah. And that's one of the major problems we've seen with the particular investments that were remade in old forms of energy that keep us behind as a state from other states who continue to in new forms of renewable energy and bring all sorts of new jobs to the state. And so we can have the best of both worlds. We can have the two fastest growing jobs of the next decade, which are solar energy installers and wind turbine technicians. And we can also increase the quality of our air, that we have less asthma attacks for our children, and that we have public health overall from just overall better air quality. And so that is an excellent focus that combines both the economic package of bringing new jobs that are going to be needed after this national crisis ends, and then also allows us to continue to promote public health overall. And so both with public health and making sure that we have everyone who is able to receive the proper care that they need, those kinds of investments into health insurance and pensions is something that our campaign has been concerned with, and that is something that we noticed from the very start of canvassing back in January. There was a moment where we were canvassing in Lebanon, and we were talking to voters there, and it was in the middle of January, and I expect that people in Ohio are not used to people canvassing in January in the cold. We're not Iowa, we're not used to that kind of thing. So once my campaign manager and I had finished up moving on, and we just pulled away from where we were parked, and a cop car pulled up behind us, and they pulled us over to the side of the road, and the officer came out and he asked us a couple of questions of just, were you knocking doors, etc. We got a report just on us. And one of the things that he wanted to be able to talk to us about, he didn't want to just talk to us about what the report was, is he was genuinely interested about what we were proposing overall. And the primary thing he was concerned about is the fact that we continue to have these cost of living adjustments and potential for the loss of health insurance who are contributing into pension plans right now. And he said that even though he's a Republican, that he's open to a choice. And so our campaign has been focused on giving that officer and those like him, those teachers, those public employees, a choice between the two people who are in this race. So Paige, do you want to the pension plan that we have just unveiled this evening?
Yeah. So I want to start by saying I remember when Morgan, after that session of canvassing, when we had our meeting and Morgan told us that story, and we decided we were going to get to start on figuring out how we were going to fix this problem for these like dedicated, so valued employees to the state. And that really inspired me to like figure out what these problems are and how we're going to fix them. So I'll start by saying that all 5 of the pension plans in Ohio are severely underfunded. they follow an outdated structure that requires the employers to essentially build a fund of money, which they do by investing and stuff like that, and then pay their beneficiaries, the employees, at a later date once they've retired. So they build this fund with the promise that in the future you will get X amount of money for X amount of years. But the problem is these funds have been severely mismanaged, and as we get to the number of retirees increasing, there's not enough money. And they don't respond by saying, okay, where do we find more money? What are we going to do? They respond by making cuts. And that's not okay, because these people have served Ohio for decades of their lives. And they deserve that money. So the main part of our plan is to, obviously, once the state has reached a state of economic stability, once funds are not being allocated to this emergency situation, we want to the rainy day fund that is set up in the state budget to get to work on refunding these plans in order to give people the benefits, the pension that they were promised, so that they can have a happy, safe, secure retirement. Because I think we're all getting a little dose of what an secure, unknown future is like, and it's a little terrifying, not gonna lie. And so we want to make sure that no one, in every aspect, that no one has to experience that any more than absolutely necessary. And then the other biggest change we would propose is that for new employees and all these plans, that we shift to a defined contribution system, which would allow people to individually manage their own pension benefits, which would increase the portability of the plans, so increase people's ability to change jobs or move out of state in the same career. And then also just make sure that they're in charge of their benefits, so they really feel that they, because some guy managing this huge pension fund, that's a little scary to me. That's my retirement. What are you, but truly ensuring that the people of Ohio who are doing such important work, that they have the right to manage that and ensure that their future is secure. And then to that end, because I know that's a little scary, managing your money and setting yourself up for that. And as we've seen, the stock market's not the most stable in times of crisis. We want to also dedicate funding to information, informative programs to help people truly learn how to safely manage their money, so that they don't feel like we're taking away a resource from them, so that they truly feel like their benefits are secure in their hands and that they know how to safely manage it.
Well, thank you. That's an excellent breakdown. I think that shows also will continue to impact us immediately after this crisis, particularly in regards to portability and making sure that those people who have earned and started to create that pension in whatever public system that they're working in, whether they're a hardworking teacher, they're part of our emergency services, and that we need to be able to make sure that if they need to be able to, more job reasons or otherwise, that those benefits go with them. And so that's a big part of this plan, and I encourage all of you to be able to read that at home. You can go to morganshowen.com/issues to be able to read any of the plans that we've laid out so far this evening. I think that with that from Paige, that is the conclusion discussion. I want to thank everybody so much for being able to tune in and for staying home and to helping to flatten the curve. That way we can move on from this crisis as soon as possible. I want to be able to thank again all of the people who are working in those frontline jobs, those people who are working in our hospitals and our healthcare systems to keep us safe, and those people who are working in grocery stores and making sure that we continue to have food and that we are able to continue on in this crisis. So thank you to all of you. Thank you to Devin and Paige. And I hope to be able to continue having conversations with you all in the weeks to come.
Excellent. Thank you, Morgan.
Thank you both.